It started with a letter. The envelope was old, the paper inside yellowed and brittle, stamped with coordinates and a single phrase. Find what was left behind. For Ethan Caldwell, a historian who specialized in lost civilizations, it was a call he couldn't ignore. It arrived without a return address, yet it felt personal, as though the sender knew exactly what haunted his thoughts. The fabled Temple of Aeon, a sanctuary whispered about in obscure texts, said to be buried beneath the sands of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. The temple was no ordinary ruin. Legend held that it was the cradle of a forgotten people, an ancient civilization that vanished without a trace, taking their advanced knowledge with them. Some said they had mastered energy beyond imagination, a gift or curse from celestial beings. Others believed they'd unlocked the secrets of time itself. Ethan dismissed the myths as exaggeration, but the idea of finding a lost piece of human history, hidden in one of the world's harshest deserts, was irresistible. Ethan wasn't alone. With him were three companions. Nadia, an archaeologist with a knack for deciphering ancient languages, Samir, a local desert guide who had grown up hearing whispered warnings about the area, and Claire, a tech-savvy researcher who handled drone mapping and equipment. Together, they embarked on the journey into the heart of the desert, driven by curiosity, ambition, and perhaps a tinge of greed for fame. The journey began under a blazing sun. The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of shifting dunes and shimmering heat. Samir warned them about the dangers, sandstorms, venomous creatures, and the desert's uncanny ability to disorient even the most experienced travelers. But there's something else, he added one night by the fire, his voice low. The locals believe the area is cursed. Those who go seeking the temple never return. Ethan dismissed it as superstition, but Nadia couldn't shake the unease. Every legend has a grain of truth, she muttered, running her fingers over a fragment of pottery they'd found earlier. The shard bore strange symbols, unlike any script they'd encountered before, glowing faintly under the light of the fire. 2 days later, they reached the coordinates from the letter. The landscape was eerily still. No wind, no sound, just a heavy, oppressive silence. The drones picked up something unusual beneath the sand. A structure buried deep, its shape unnaturally geometric for something hidden so long. It was unmistakable. They had found it. They began digging. As they uncovered the entrance, they noticed something odd. The stone wasn't weathered like most ruins. It was smooth, almost polished, as though time had no effect here. The doorway was etched with more of the glowing symbols, and Nadia worked feverishly to translate. It's a warning, she said finally, her voice trembling. Enter, and time unravels. Ignoring the warning, Ethan insisted they proceed. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint hum of something ancient vibrating through the walls. Their flashlights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. At the bottom, they found themselves in a vast chamber. The walls were covered in the glowing script, pulsating faintly, as if alive. In the center stood an enormous obelisk, black as night, its surface rippling like liquid despite being solid. Around the obelisk, stone pedestals displayed artifacts that defied explanation. A sphere that floated and spun in place, a tablet that projected moving images, and a device that looked mechanical but emitted no sound or heat. Claire approached the obelisk, her camera capturing every detail. It's not just ancient. It's advanced, she whispered, her breath fogging the air. Ethan reached out to touch it, ignoring Nadia's protests. The moment his fingers made contact, the chamber erupted in light. Symbols flowed off the walls and onto Ethan, wrapping around him like a living tattoo. His eyes widened in terror as his voice echoed unnaturally. It's showing me everything. What do you mean? Nadia shouted, grabbing his arm, but Ethan's gaze was distant, his voice detached. Time, the past, the future, it's all here. The temple isn't just a place, it's a vessel, a library of everything that ever was and will be. They hid it to protect us, but now. He trailed off, staring at his hands, which were beginning to fade, flickering like static. Panic set in. We have to leave, Samir yelled, but the obelisk began to pulse, its energy pulling them toward it. The artifacts on the pedestals activated, projecting images of distant galaxies, extinct species, and events that hadn't yet come to pass. The chamber felt alive, as though the temple itself was waking up. Ethan screamed as he vanished entirely, his voice lingering for a moment before silence fell. Nadia and Claire stumbled backward, their minds reeling from the onslaught of visions. Samir grabbed their arms, dragging them toward the staircase. "Now," he shouted. As they fled, the walls began to shift, the glowing symbols forming new warnings. The balance has been broken. The staircase seemed longer, the air heavier, but they finally emerged into the desert, gasping for breath. Behind them, the entrance sealed itself, the dunes shifting to cover it once more. Weeks later, back in civilization, they tried to piece together what had happened. Claire's footage was corrupted, the files showing only static. The artifacts they had taken dissolved into sand. And Ethan. Ethan was gone, though Nadia swore she heard his voice in her dreams, whispering fragments of the symbols she'd seen. Their story spread, but few believed them. The Temple of Aeon became another desert myth, a cautionary tale about humanity's arrogance in seeking what should remain hidden. Yet Nadia couldn't let it go. She returned to the coordinates a year later, but the entrance was gone, swallowed by the shifting sands. And still, in the quiet of the desert nights, travelers sometimes hear a faint hum, a whisper carried on the wind, calling them to the empty quarter, where secrets older than time itself wait, buried beneath the sands.